Hello, Katerina. How are you? Thanks for the videos. I'm seeing a lot of good progress there. Um, Most of that stuff sounded awesome. So, definite improvement over the last couple weeks. So, I could see you've been practicing. So, thank you for that. And let's jump into it. So, I got some notes in front of me. Um, the fill. So, the 4-bar groove with the fill at the end. And your dad mentioned something about you only did one of those fills this week, and that's all I was expecting you to do. So that's totally cool. And yeah, I think we could maybe add the second fill this week. The first fill sounded great. You're executing it really well. You were playing the right drums and cymbals, even though I couldn't demonstrate that very well last week. And you weren't really rushing or dragging. Most people rush their fills, including myself. Even if just a little bit, the tendency is to always rush the fill. And your fills were basically good, so that was awesome. And you were getting the crash and making the transitions there. The beat you played was it wasn't the beat that's written on the page. Part of it was, and it wasn't one of the beats from our 16th note backbeat grooves page. But it was like this sort of hybrid Katerina beat, which was cool. But I'm wondering if you didn't realize that that's what you were doing. Maybe you thought you were playing the beat on the page, but you ended up like hearing this other beat and you ended up playing that instead. It's a cool beat. I'm going to play that beat for you right now so you can hear it. And let's see, I'm going to set myself to 60. I'm actually going to ask you to transcribe this beat, which is the beat that you were playing. And by transcribe, I mean you're going to write it out, right? So put in your hi-hats, put in your kicks and your snares, and see if you can figure out what this beat is that you came up with, and write it out, and then take a picture of that and show me what you got. So this is what you played. And I'll just play it a little bit so that when you're trying to write it out, you can kind of watch and listen to this and hopefully figure out what it is on paper. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so it's very similar to all those other beats that we've been working on. So maybe things just got a little mixed up in your head. This isn't wrong. You didn't do the wrong thing here necessarily, but it's just interesting what happened, and you ended up creating this sort of new beat that's sort of your own interpretation, and it seemed like it felt really good to you. So this is sort of it's sort of a nice thing to look at and to realize. It's like, oh, Katerina found her own beat, you know, and chances are that beat probably feels better to you than a lot of the other beats on those pages because it's something that came from you. So it's worth noting. Cool. All right, so let's look at the second fill on the fills page, and I'm going to go back to the beat that's actually written on the page, and the fill, let's look at that real quick. So we're looking at this page, our fills page, and now we're going to look at this fill here, the second line at the end here. So I'll come up to the camera and explain this, hopefully. So what do we have here? It's snare and floor tom. And the snare drum is in that typical snare drum space that it's always in. And then the floor tom is in the space below that, and I circled it, so it makes it easier to decipher that that's actually a tom-tom, not a snare drum or something else. So snare and floor, and you can see they're all lined up together on the same stems, which means that they're played at the exact same time, which is, I wrote down here, hands together. So your hands are playing the snare drum and the floor tom together at the same time. And it's 16th notes, just like the fill we had from last week, but it's voiced differently, floor tom and snare, and the sticking is different. It's hands together, or what we would call hands in unison, hands at the same time. So the fill at 60 looks like this. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay. 1, 2. 3 E and a 4 E and a 1, 2. 3 E and a 4 E and a 1, 2. 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 with the beat now. 3 E and a 4 E and a So again, that was at 60, and again, you're going to be hitting your crash after the fill, which is over on this side for your drum kit, right? But everything else is the same. So I think that should be pretty accessible for you, easy to understand. In a way, it's simpler than what we did last week, although playing your hands together at the exact same time, that might not be something you're quite used to yet. That actually comes up a fair amount on this instrument. There's a lot of times where we end up playing our hands at the same time for different beats or different fills or catching different accents or things like that. So good to be aware of. What else did I want to say? Okay, the hand position, right? So as my typical fashion, I'm sort of playing at a medium-ish volume for these videos, so I'm just not really remembering to demonstrate that for you. I did switch that in my last round there, but I would say, I mean, how is that feeling for you? Like, is it feeling still a little weird? If it's feeling still a little weird, like, just keep playing that way all the time, if you can, when we're doing a hi-hat beat kind of thing. Cool. All right, you're getting into the backbeat grooves now. Those were all really nice. Your time was great. Your mix was really good. Like the snare was nice and loud now, And sometimes you were forgetting this position and then going back, and obviously you're looking at me who forgets to do it all the time, so I'm no help there. But that was all really great. So I'm just looking at that page here. And my notes. Where did my notes go? Okay, so I didn't hear the second backbeat, probably because you thought that you were playing that when you did the fills page, because it's supposed to be the same beat. The second backbeat from that page is the same beat that's on the fills page. So that's cool. Maybe see if you can get that beat right on the fills page this week. So I can hear that, but I'm assuming it's not too bad. And the first beat sounded great. The third beat sounded great, but you changed it partway through in the video. So you played it right like the first 3 or 4 bars, I think, and then you made one little change in the kick drum. So if we're looking at that third beat on the page, the slight issue was that second bass drum note on the and of 1. It's on the and of 1, which you did for a few bars, and then you moved it over to the of 1. So kind of like where it is on the second backbeat groove on that page. So, probably what's going on is you're just sort of getting your kick drums a little mixed up with all these beats, because they're all kind of similar in a way, and they're sort of complicated in a way, and there's a lot going on, so maybe you're just sort of getting them a little mixed up. So I think maybe just sort of like double checking with yourself when you're practicing stuff, to make sure that you're actually playing what's written there on the page. So anyways, that third groove, I'll play it at 60. 2, 3, 4. So that's what you played initially, but then you changed it to this. 3, 4. Okay, so I know it's like not that big a deal, right? It's just one bass drum note, but when I play that, it's like a totally different groove. It feels different in my body. So as subtle a difference as that is, it's important to notice that it's actually kind of a big difference in the scheme of things. Cool. All right, so, and you memorized things, by the way. Nice. That was kind of the goal, right? I saw you not looking at the page. Nice work. And you were counting. So in general, you were playing everything right because you knew where everything was. So that's good. So let's say and we're going to move on from this stuff before long. So if you're starting to get a little bored with it, I apologize. But the end is in sight. And we'll introduce some newer things. Let's say as a goal for this week, we get these 3 backbeats and the second line on the fills page all comfortable and memorized, which they already are basically, and at 60. So I think the fastest you've gone so far is 50, which is nice, but I think you can get up to 60 without a whole lot of problem. And while you're at it, I think you can start to abandon your counting and rely on your hearing. I think so. that's going to be kind of up to you. If you find that by not counting, you just can't remember it, or you're messing it up constantly, then you're going to have to go back to counting a little bit. And it's going to be this sort of ebb and flow of counting, not counting, counting, not counting. It could be like that for the whole week. Who knows? But give yourself the opportunity to try it without counting and be willing to make mistakes. And you may find that it's not that bad. And you're able to play all these grooves really comfortably, memorized, and at 60. And that would be super cool. So let's set that as a goal for those things. And we'll be good there for this week. So what else we got? Note values. Okay, cool. That all looked really good. Like, huge improvement over last week. The sticking was good. I should note, there's a little bit of latency in the video that I'm getting from your dad. I'm assuming he's taking it on his phone or whatever, and there may be nothing we can do about that, and I can totally deal with it. It's not a big deal. But there is a little latency, which means when I hear the sound, it's either happening, I think it's happening before I actually see what's happening. So there's a difference between the sound and what I'm seeing. Maybe it's just like a setting on his phone or something. I don't know. Worth checking out. But if that's the way it is, it's no big deal. But I definitely noticed it when I was looking at the note values. It's like, whoa, it's which hand is playing when here? It was a little hard to tell because of that. But I figured it out, and it looks good. And it's all sounding good. So I think what we'll do with that is, that's something to just sort of work into your, well, it already is worked in, but just keep doing it. Keep it in your practice routine. You only have to do it, like, go through the page like twice or maybe 4 times or something like that. But do it every time you sit down to practice. It only takes a minute or two. And I don't need to see that again this week. I think it's good. It's just a matter of getting more comfortable with it and just being aware of making things clean and spaced and even and all that stuff we've been talking about. So maybe I'll ask to see it again in another couple weeks or something like that, just to sort of check in on it. But I don't need to see that again this week. It's looking really good. Cool. All right, so that was note values. What else we got here? We're gonna fill back these. Okay, so I'm gonna add. How am I doing on time? Good. I'm gonna add rudiments. Hey, I'm pretty sure I gave you this page, right? There's actually 4 pages. Hang on a sec. Lola wants to go out. You want to come say hi, Lola? Katarina's on the video. Come here. Come here. Here. Say hi to Kat. Lolo says hi. Okay. Here, go out. Okay, so the rudiments, I'm pretty sure I gave you all 4 pages. It's like 4 pages of craziness on the snare drum. So let's get started on that. This is something we couldn't really dive into until you developed an understanding for the note values. And now you have a great understanding of the note values. So progress, right? We're moving forward. It's awesome. So we're going to look at only the first line. And let me come up to the camera to try to explain this because it's a little bit confusing. So, the first line up here is what we call roughs, and I'll demonstrate those in a second, but I just want to point out how all this is written because it's probably a little different than what you've seen so far. So I only wrote things on 1 line. We don't have those 5 lines like a staff, like on all the other stuff I give you that you're used to, or piano music, for example. this is all just on snare drum, so I didn't need to eat up all that space with a whole bunch of lines. Plus I had to write all these crazy stickings underneath things. And sometimes I have to write stuff over the top of the notes too. So I just wrote everything on this one line. So that's why it might look a little different. But you can see that each line is divided into 4 bars with these bar lines. So 1 bar, 2 bar, 3 bars, 4 bars. So every line on all of these pages is 4 bars. Simple. Now, what's a little confusing is the repeats. So there's 2 different types of repeats going on this line. First, if we look at this measure here, we have 4 quarter note roughs. And then the next measure, this symbol is a repeat symbol. And it means that you repeat the previous measure. So the previous measure would be that. So it just means do that twice, right? So you end up with 1 bar, 2 bars of this. Then we get to here, which is like another repeat sign. And it has these little wings on it, right? So the wings that are facing this way mean that now you have to repeat the 2 measures that you just played. So that repeat goes back to the beginning. Okay? So it's a little confusing, but it's very simple. It basically means you're playing 4 measures of that. And then you go to the next one where it's still quarter note roughs, but the sticking changes. And then it's the same format, right? We have the 1 measure here, and then you repeat that measure again, and then there's another repeat at the end. But that repeat goes back to this repeat, which has the wings going that way now. So again, it's the same thing we had over here. It's just a different sticking. It's 4 measures of quarter note roughs. So, hopefully I explained that well. Once you get used to it, it's actually easier to read this way of notation. And as someone that's writing it, it's much more efficient and saves a lot more space. That's why we do things this way sometimes. And once you get used to it, it's a piece of cake. All right, so let me demonstrate roughs. So if you're looking at your page there, you can see that there's 2 small L's, left hands, and then a big right hand. So it's basically 2 short notes with your left, and then sort of an accented note that happens on the downbeat with your right. So it's like this. Okay. So that's basically it. The downbeats with your right, that happens on the downbeats. So they're quarter notes. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the left-handed stuff comes just before the right-hand stuff that would be on the actual downbeat. So we're going to set our metronome to 70. And we're going to stay at 70 for a long time working on these rudiments. So just make a note of that. Anytime you're doing the rudiments, we're at 70. And then there's going to be times where you need to slow it down. So if I play that with a click at 70, you can hear that my right hand lines up with the click. Those are the actual downbeats. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So you'll want to start slower than that. You can do it without a metronome completely. And just sit there and see if you can get the spacing of your lefts and the spacing between your lefts and your right to be similar to what I'm doing. So it's kind of like this again. So that's sort of an ideal spacing. Let me demonstrate if the lefts were too far apart. It might sound like this. Okay, that would be too far apart. Or if the lefts were too close together and it almost sounds like a buzz, that would be kind of like this. Okay, so what we want is in between those two, where we hear the two left notes clearly, but they're not too far apart, and they're not so tight that they sound like a buzz. So again, kind of like this. Okay? So, it'll probably take you a while just to get that happening, and that's totally cool. And that might not totally happen in a week. This could take a month or two before you're just super dialed with your roughs, and that's totally cool. We can keep moving on with other rudiments on this page, and as we go, you'll just learn to really dial in the right spacing for those roughs, and it's totally cool. Technically, there's a little more finger action going on in your left hand there in order to get those notes the right spacing and the right clarity. So really, it's just you're hitting down as if it's one stroke, but you're using your fingers to sort of control the bounce in order to turn it into two separate notes. And let me demonstrate with the other side. So starting with the right hand and then the lefts or the accented downbeats. Those would look like this. Okay, so again, it's just developing a little bit of finger control, and all I can say is just be aware of that and just try it, and within time, you'll figure it out. It's not that bad. So let me demonstrate the first line for you at 70. I'll do the whole thing. So it's 4 bars of left starting first and 4 bars of right starting first. Like this. 2, 3, 4. So actually the first one, since they have an accent on the right, the downbeats are with the right, we would call those right-handed roughs. And the second one where the accent is the left on the downbeats, we would call those left-handed roughs. So, you will probably find that your right-handed roughs sound and feel different than your left-handed roughs. And this is totally natural. And I've been doing these forever, and I just played them now, and they're really close, but I can still feel and hear a little difference between the right-handed roughs and the left-handed roughs. So it's kind of always there a little bit, but of course the goal is to make your right-handed roughs and your left-handed roughs sound exactly the same. Cool. Alrighty, I think that is it, and I think that should make sense. So basically what we'll do with these rudiments is probably add like one new rudiment every week. And this is basically like, in some ways, the language of drumming. So in the same way that a melodic instrument like piano or saxophone or a singer or whatever, in the same way that they would practice scales all the time, this is our version of scales for drums. And not only is it sort of part of the language of playing the instrument, but it's also a way to develop control over your sticks. And it's a proven method. It's part of the instrument, and I'm not a huge fan of this stuff, and obviously we've been having lessons for a while, and I just start to bring it up now because I do think there's a lot of other priorities. But it is something that any drummer who wants to be really good needs to go through. And these 4 pages that I gave you, in my opinion, are the best way to practice rudiments. And basically, there was this super famous drummer teacher guy named Alan Dawson who taught at Berklee School of Music forever. And my drum teacher in college was a student of Alan Dawson. And so he learned this whole method of practicing rudiments. It's what Alan called the rudimental ritual. And he learned this from Alan, and then he passed it on to me. And now I'm passing it on to you. And ask any amazing drummer about this, and they all know what you're talking about, and probably 99% of them went through this ritual. So it really is the best way to practice rudiments, and if you go through this process and work on it, within a year or two, you will have really good control over your sticks and be able to play crazy stuff that you never thought was possible. So that's the whole point. Groovy. That is it for this week. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. And everything's sounding really nice. I enjoy watching your videos, and I'm seeing progress. So I hope you're having a certain amount of fun with this, and that you're realizing that the work that you're putting into it is working. And I see really good progress. So thank you for that, and I will talk to you next week. All right.